That was our sound to start off with. So we have John's probably early days, older Epiphone Les Paul, and it's quite light, so I think it's got chambering, or maybe a lighter timbre. That's a bit loose. So this is in for a setup, and the first fret action is pretty high, and John has asked me to do an adjustable nut, even though this is a Tusq one and it's a nice looking nut. It's just very high over the first fret, so we'd still need to be cutting into it, which I'm kind of keen to avoid. So we're going to replace it with a Tusq adjustable. John asked me to check. He'd rewired the switch and wanted to make sure that was all in order. Pot's a little bit crackly, but they all work. Crackle, crackle. That's the old thing, got both on, and one knob turns both off, which I always thought, maybe there's a sense to that. Yeah, I suppose, maybe, yeah, I suppose so. If you're playing and you want to go silent. I suppose they chose to do it that way, so you didn't have to turn off two volume pots to get it to shut up. So this has got quite a high action all round, so we're going to lower this down, and we're going to see what it can tolerate. We've got an aftermarket bridge on here, which is good, roller bridge. So because it's a tuning-matic bridge, I have the pleasure of just being able to drop the action down now without struggling too hard. So we're going to go down to our 1.5 and our 1.2. That's kind of just about there, actually. Choking out on the, well, it's choking out when you bend on the 12th, which is what we're going to overcome. High E, E, bend, 12th, choke. It's not uncommon, but that's what we'll strive to get rid of. Okay, so a bit of work to do. When this is, let's put a capo on here a minute and just readjust the last fret action. Because it's so high at the other end, I'm just going to readjust with the capo on as if it's, well, making it closer to the end height that we'll get when we have the adjustable nut on. So it is a bit low still, probably. Come on, give me some light, that's it. This is I like the look of this. It's got the sort of vintage looking cherry burst thing about it. I really like the look. Beautifully out of tune. Okay, well, first thing I just noticed, we don't want the pickup up that high because that's now practically touching the strings. So we'll take that down a bit. The rule, as they say, the watchword is closer the tuner is, closer the strings are to the poles of the magnet, the greater the output, but the less tonal dynamics you get from your strings. So that's what they say. So you see I've pulled loads of slack as well. We'll get onto that a bit later on. John, this, if you want the guitar to stay in tune, the secret I discovered is that you need to take care of two things. The nut slots, or the condition of the nut, and the amount of unreleased slack in your strings. Those two things will give you stable tuning. So we're going to take care of the nut part. So you can hear what we've got there is what I call fret slap. So we've got some a bit of fret buzz, you could call it. In other words, a high fret in the system is causing the high E bend to choke out, which we need to remove with fret leveling, or ease with fret leveling. And we've also got a general all-round buzziness at that chosen low action, and that's what I call fret slap. And there's a situation where there isn't quite enough room for the frets to move, sorry, for the strings to move, so they strike the frets. Now that's a tricky thing because it's a very, very precise thing. The actions we're setting here are very low, and the strings need a certain amount of room. They need a concave neck to a degree. Let's just have a quick check. Actually, I didn't check that bit. We check the relief of the neck, see whether it's concave or convex. That's pretty good. That's about the right amount of relief, about 0.2 of a mil. So we need that little bit of space, which is adequate, and then we need to, the strings need to be able to move when you strike them. And the fact that they were buzzing at that action means that they're just slightly clipping some parts of the frets. Now, believe it or not, the fret leveling technique that I use will ease that off. And it's one of the amazing sort of bonuses that I discovered from using it. Not only will it level obvious high frets or bottom out low frets causing problems, it will also allow me to gently kind of level out the curve of the frets in such a way. I'll give you an example. you know, I've done this before, but let's say your neck is sort of like this, right? And you've got frets sitting at various places, up and down that kind of strange valley looking thing, right? When I use the fret leveling technique that I use, what's amazing is that we sample the curve of the neck in 3 different places, right? Here, here, and here. And as a result, we then bend the fret leveling tool to work with those 3 points. You can see that, and what you get, if you notice, even with my bad drawing, you see that the upper curve is smoother than the lower curve. The lower curve is reality, i.e. it's your fretboard with the frets mounted and placed on it. And this one here is what I call the ideal curve of the banana, as I call it, which is the adjustable tool. So we sample the curve of the neck in 3 places. Because we only sample it in 3 places, and then we bend the banana to meet those 3 points, the banana bends more smoothly than the actual neck. It bends in an ideal curve because it's touching those 3 sample points. It's not bothering about the inaccuracies and the wobbles around here. So it creates a more ideal curve. But then when we use it, it actually brings these frets down and kind of clips that one a little bit and clips that one a little bit. And basically, in doing so, it also imposes its more ideal curve onto the fretboard. I wouldn't say the actual fingerboard, but the fretboard. So it's fretboard and frets is the fretboard. So it imposes that nice ideal curve onto it, and that's why doing this method seems to open up the just that tiny extra bit of space required to stop the strings buzzing as we go up. As at the same time, it's also taking away any obviously high frets, and it's going to ease up that choke on that 12th fret bend. So beautiful, look at that colour. I mean, it's got a nice sort of flame maple top finish, but the yellow and red sunburst for me is just, it's the colour of guitars. Some of these old pickup surrounds are a bit you know, broken and stuff, but it's got character. There's the roller bridge, which is an aftermarket thing. The rhythm treble middle selector is working perfectly well. I'll just take a look in the back just to make sure. And the frets aren't in too bad shape at all. There's a little bit of wear down here, but not that much. But in leveling it, we'll clear that up. What I noticed on this is that in replacing and removing the original nut, there's been a bit of damage up here, which I fully sympathise with. What's also happened is John, you've put this back on here, and it's under a bit of pressure from the larger nut. The Epiphone nuts are odd things. They're a bit taller than everyone else's. I can see what's happened here. I think in fitting, it looks like in fitting new Goto tuners, maybe you've drilled through here, and this bit is kind of snapped off and glued back in, but it's split, and it's a bit sad looking. Bless it. You can see. Oops. There you go. A big chunk of finish has come off the top, so be careful so that doesn't come off. So it's fingers crossed. It should be a fairly straightforward set up with a adjustable nut. And let's just get this one set back up into a decent position. It's very let's take it off the thing a minute. I'm trying to find, it's very difficult. I'm trying to find positions over here that will get a reasonable long shot, because this is a great camera for dragging around and doing you know, close-ups and stuff, but it isn't quite as groovy as a long shot thing. And there's some times where I need to zoom in and close up, but I can bring things like, there's our adjustable nut, which we're going to use. But of course, the adjustable nut requires a base, so I'm going to, in the olden days I would have made that base out of Plast Aid, but I'm testing out some 3D printed ones that a very kind person has collaborated with me to make. Hopefully I'll be ordering a bunch of them, and they live somewhere in here. If I can remember which are the good ones and which are the not so good ones. Hey. Did I know this was going to happen? We've got a variety of different ones, and some are too tall and some aren't. this the right one? I think these are the right ones. I really ought to, I think I ought to do something so I can separate these out. So I'm going to get confused very soon. Maybe I'll stick them to the board where all useful things get stuck. So here we have the adjustable nut bases, which really does speed up my life quite a bit. So I'm going to just dial this in, check this fits. A bit of dust. Now these still require a very small amount of adjustment sanding, but it is much smaller than before, much less than before. So that's a great blessing. So I'm going to stick these here because I'm always going to need them. Okay, so we've got the adjustable nut. So let's get started. We've got the action down here right. This action will change when we fit the adjustable nut. My amp is off. Going to just double check my camera view. That's pretty good. Not up close or anything. I ought to have a sort of thing where I can put it back exactly in its position and know where it is. Okay, so straight away I'm going to undo the strings. God, yeah, this is, you can see where it's a bit, chunks have come off. It's a hellish thing changing a nut. I don't feel bad about it, John, because last week I set up a guitar, and for the first time in hundreds of such guitars, the whole of the headstock here delaminated as I tapped off the nut, and it took a great swathe of finish off the front. Started to try and peel it back on a sort of sprung basis. So I had to repair the whole front and glue it and refinish it and spray and God knows what else. Okay. Right, well, we're not going to make an adjustment there because that's okay, but I can see it's taken off some finish. I mean, this is okay actually. It's pressing up against it. It's not under that much tension. I can see you've put a chamfer on it, so I won't mess with that. Okay, so this is where I hope that John hasn't used an absolute boatload of super glue. Get a little bit of a fab, just a very small. It's great. It's gone inside the little square holes. Gone inside the square holes and made little like lift shaft cavities, centers. Right, let's have a quick look at the end finish. It's not too bad. We do need to get rid of these little crunchy bits of glue. There we go, and there we go. No, this isn't super glue, is it? Or is it? Something different, slightly different. Okay, so now the Epiphone slots are quite deep in my experience, so I'm going to have to be careful to that this will fit. That's just about right actually, as long as I can get it to fit. Now, even though the aim once upon a time was to get the bass that we didn't have to adjust at all with the sanding, there's no way around it really. So this thing needs to be a minimum thickness at the base to go into this little pre-made slot, and it's a fraction over. So I'm going to begin by just very carefully thinning back the body of this block until it fits. It's got to fit into here, and it's actually on both sides it extends. This may be one of the older ones actually. This is where I probably already messed them up, but it may extend. Do we have 5 or 3? It could be a smaller number was the one I wanted. No, that's got pink on the bottom. This ain't right. That's small but curved. Yeah. Okay, I think this is the right one, but we're so very close. Still needs a tiny bit of work. Okay, let's just do the work, Samuel. So I'm just bringing the back end in, and now I'm going to just bring it in flush with the back of the nut. Now the great thing about these nuts is you can afford to lightly cut into the Tusq insert because it's not going to do any harm. As long as you've got a flat surface for the strings to jump off on the front side, everything will be just hunky-dory. And that's what I'm aiming to do. So I want it to be squared off, that's all. And I don't mind, as I say, taking a tiny bit of the Tusq with it, so long as it's square. So as you can see, with any amount of with some adjustment needing doing it, there is a bit of care required to get this right. That's nearly there. No, not quite. So, the difficult bit is to get it flush. It usually does cost a little bit in the Tusq nut material to get it absolutely flush. But once you're there, it's fine, it works perfectly well. So I would say that's pretty much dead straight flush. So that's the back end. Now I'm going to turn my attention to doing the same to the front, and we'll keep going until it drops into that slot perfectly. So it's really a matter of switching between the two grades of sandpaper here to get it down to where I want. Now you can notice I do my silly rocking dance. I'd rather do that than move my hands, which shifts the angle of everything. This is the best way to get a flush finish, is to keep your hands still and move your body. Probably advice given by Fred Astaire to all his would-be Fred Astaire's. And then sometimes if it just leans a bit one way, you then have to sort of develop the skill of doing what appears to be a flat sand, but with a bit more pressure on one side compared to the other, which gives you a little bit of a kind of cuts inwards a little bit. Probably could use some new sandpaper here, finally. And we get dead flush. You can feel it when it's right on the mark. That's pretty good. And then let me try one more time. This even though with a bit of time spent doing this is infinitely preferable to the amount of time spent before doing it. Now, if it still needs taking in, then my recommendation is you go back to the back side and you thin from the back side, providing the front side is nice and flush and square to the bottom plane, if you like. You can afford to lose some off the back edge if overall thinning it down is what's needed, which in this case it is. So I'm starting to get it now, so it's beginning to want to fit into that slot, only maybe just. So it's a matter of just, you can feel the edge and it's still a bit wide on all fronts, so I'm going to gently wear it down still. So this technique started when once I discovered the importance of the nut in the setup. There was no way I wasn't going to do a setup with a nut with a perfect first fret action. That was a given from that point onwards. And so my method was I had to do whatever it took to end up with the perfect first fret action and as good and as friction-free slots as it was humanly possible to make. And that's not actually that possible when you use something like bone, even though it's a nice solid material. It doesn't really do very well with, it's still a bit friction-tastic. That's almost spot on there. But the floor that I'm putting it onto is a bit of a bit uneven. So I'm going to have to rely on this sort of sitting and bridging some slight unevenness in here. That's just going to be the way it is. Yeah, so anyway, I kind of spent tons of time getting nuts right to get the perfect first fret action and to have, you know, the best possible improvement to playability. And you know, it took a long time. There was a lot of nut slot filing and so on and so forth. Anyway, eventually what happened was I came across this insert made by Tusq or Graphtech, and when I first saw that, I thought, my God, that will work for my, you know, it could save me an absolute ton of time, but more importantly, it could give customers a tuning stability like no other, and perfect first fret action. So those two things together would just be an absolute boon, blessing, miracle in the guitar world. So what I did was I got me a couple, and I just realised that the biggest challenge was I had to make a bass of some kind. So I kind of looked around for a few different materials, and I started out making basses out of milliput, which is actually worked okay. It's not ideal, but it did work. So I did that for the first few guitars, and what was fantastic, of course, was that the increase in playability was immediate from the outset. Got a wonderful low first fret action, and along with, you know, tuning stability thrown in, which was brilliant. So I was hooked, convinced, and so from that point onwards I was never going to go back to not using them. Now the thing is with these, I just have to round the edges off a bit, because this 3D printing, now I've gone and done that classic thing of forgetting which side was which. That 3D printing can be very sharp, so it's a good idea to round these off. I'm just going to put this back together again and make sure I've got the sides facing. One of these days I'll remember to actually draw something on here. That actually could be the wrong way round, but what it's showing me is that there is a little bit of, tiny bit of hangover here that needs taking care of. Take care of it. Right. Yeah, so anyway, as soon as I used one for the first time, I realised what an amazing improvement it made. So I started using them at every opportunity, and then I went looking for the appropriate materials to make these basses out of. Now, across the time, I have made them from milliput, a couple of different kinds of resins, and I eventually ended up with some stuff called Plastade, which was very good for it. The only problem is it took quite a long time to make the basses, shape them, and then eventually hand shape them down to fit. But you know, the whole point was it was such a good improvement on the outcome that it was worth doing. So that became kind of standard to my setup. I wouldn't, more and more setups I included this in, and I think many customers could see that my enthusiasm for it and the fact that I've got it on all of my guitars was a pretty good sign that I was completely convinced by its effectiveness. A little bit more to take off here. Anyway, so that's become the sort of standard on all three-a-side guitars now that I set up. And I think it's probably fair to say that where I don't fit it, it's an exception to the rule rather than the other way around. It can be that, you know, somebody just doesn't like the unconventionality of it, in which case that's fine. You know, we'll do our best with a solid Tusq nut, a bit like the one that John had fitted here. But the only downside of the solid one, from my perspective, is that it's quite hard, or it's very hard to cut it to exact shape by cutting from below, which you ideally would want to do if you're looking to if you're looking to get the perfect first fret action, you want to cut. You either have to cut down from below, cut up from below, or you have to cut down into the slots. And my experience up to that point was if you try cutting from below, a certain number of times you just wouldn't get it, and it was quite costly in starting again terms. So I ended up basically only ever, cutting down from the top, because the correct first fret action was so important that I thought, well, okay, even if we lose the ideal thing of using the factory slots, i.e. not having to cut with what is essentially a fairly ragged blunt instrument, the fret file, even if we have to use the fret file, we'll do it, because the first fret action is so important. Oops, sorry camera, didn't expect that to happen, did I? No. Let's try and stand you up some way or other. Anyway, so I kind of settled on, it's by far the better solution to have the slots brought up to the correct height and not try and cut down to the correct height. And that's what I've been doing ever since, and that's why I use these adjustable nuts. And thankfully, up till this point in time, Graphtec has continued to make them, but what's quite tragic is that I recognise there'll be a time when they don't, which is kind of weird, because then what the hell will they do? Anyway, so right here I am just going to do a quick check and put the nut in its place, and I'm just pulling the string taut. Now I want to start with this string on the first fret, and the idea is that once we've got it on the first fret, we then wind the string up to what will be the desired action, and that's absolutely perfect. Okay, so that's how it's going to sit, and by the time we bring it up, those grub screws are actually nicely inside, or set inside the nut, so they're in the right position and you don't feel them. Okay, so this is a slightly risky bit, because I'm going to put a bit of glue on here, because we need this thing to stay put. So I'm going to put a little blow on each end, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently swish it around a bit. Now this is always the kind of scary bit, because I want the nut to sit in the right place, and I haven't really got much time to get these damn stupid strings back on into the right place, because they don't ever go in the right place straight away. Do them up, double check. Okay. So when you're restringing this guitar with the adjustable nut on, always go from the middle strings first, and then when you undo them, take them off, take off the middle string last, so that there's always something pressing down to hold this adjustable bit in place, because it can jump off and run about if it feels like it when there's no string pressure on it. It probably won't, it's probably quite nicely fitted. That's about spot on actually. Yep. Get your tuner. Right, low and light. I'm just looking at this. This is this. There's about 0.5 millimeter difference in spread of strings here. This is a Gibson spec. It's a Gibson spec thing, so it's for the Les Paul. It's just slightly different from this nut, but I bet this wasn't an Epiphone. Might not have been an Epiphone specific nut either, because I've found them quite interesting to match up as well. So just having a quick double check up here. That's about right, and it feels blindingly low. So again, we've got it's a bit high at this end, so I'm just going to bring this end down a tiny bit. And you've got such great control. Bring this end up a tiny bit. And the beauty is that you can do this until such times as you have it where it suits you. Bit of some strange movement in here. It is turning. It's a bit of a slack. Blimey, that is blindingly low compared to what it was. Right, so next part, while we're at it, let us just gently take one of those off there, and let us mark up the frets ready for leveling. It's going to take a couple of, I should have done this while they were slack, but I forgot. So we'll have to do it in 2 bites. But this has been done before on this guitar. It looks like they've been leveled, so that's fine. What they won't have been is leveled to this action, so that's where it's a little bit different. Let's get this out of the way. Yeah, so I'm going to be leveling it now for this particular action that I've set. 1.5 on the low E last fret, 1.2 on the high E last fret, and 0.2 approximately millimeters of relief as measured at the midpoint, which is something like the 8th fret or 7th, depending on how you want to measure it. So I'm just dragging these out of the way to finish the marking. So I get the leveling beam out now, the banana, and give this a very careful leveling. The frets aren't massively tall, or they're quite worn. They've been played and enjoyed for many a year. So I need this to be a careful leveling. Just want to free up that choke note as, first of all, and then we want to ensure that there's as little fret slap as possible at this nice low action. Now I just want it at pitch to have it at under pressure. I'm not convinced with that D tuner. It's got some movement in it. The others are direct. Anyway, it's just the way it is. I can't do anything about it. It is what it is. Right, so the next stage is to get out the famous, legendary, old-fashioned thingy, brass monkeys, brass nuts. And I'm going to, what do I feel like? Today, Matthew, I feel like using the Squire banana. That's what I'm going to use. What's that then? Oh yeah, that's that from before. Right, today, Matthew, we're going to use the Squire banana. I'm going to put this midpoint, and we're going to use this to calibrate this neck. Now it's pretty flat, so we don't expect to have to do much adjustment. There we go. I'd say that's a good start point. So what we do is we begin by fret leveling this track, the E track as I call it, and you probably won't hear much difference straight away. We're looking to hear the bend choke clear out by the time we get to the G track and level that. But this one, I'm just sort of getting a look. Now I see straight away our problem is not so much high frets after the 12th, but the fact that the 12th is a low fret. And it's often the case, seemingly, in fact, it's almost a majority of time, if I'm honest, that the fret, it's not a high fret spoiling play, but a low fret. In this case, it's the 12th fret. I can see that the 12th fret, the 13th is also a bit low, and the 14th and the 15th and the 16th have taken quite a hit at some time in the past to even this out. Or maybe just the strings have done that for themselves. I'm just going to do a tiny bit more before moving to the B track. So when you have a low fret, basically you have to bottom out everything around it to make it work properly. And that's a kind of a bit of a scary thing, because you're costing fret metal across all of the frets to bottom out to the same level as one pesky low fret. And some people might think, well, why don't you do something just to the one fret? And the funny part is I've never yet had a situation where it's so low a problem that it turns out to be better to pull the low fret and replace it, because as soon as you replace it, you have to try and match the fret gauge. And of course, it's not new fret gauge for new fret gauge, you're trying to match a current fret gauge that you can buy with what your frets have become over time, which isn't any particular set gauge available in shops. So you're going to end up starting with one that's bigger. You're going to have to try and put it on, and then you've got a substantially higher fret, which you have to try and take down roughly to the level of everything else without damaging the frets all around it, and it just doesn't work out. Now, I'm going to do the G track in a second, but if you remember, our G high E bends choked out as they came across into the G track. So the aim of this bit of leveling now, our kind of primary target will be to free up this high E bend as it goes across the fret into what I call the G track. And it's partly the problem we know is not because there's one single high fret getting in the way, is we know that we're starting from a low fret in that, which happens to be the starting point for the E string as we're doing the bend. So that makes it a little bit harder. Now, if we can't get it, look at that. Have we got that? Yep. There you go. I'll do a tiny bit more, but you heard that with your own ears. That choked out before, and now it's freed up. So for this chosen low action, we now have regained that one bend that was choking out, and that was my principal target for leveling these frets. Secondary target now is hoping now to, as we particularly get down to the bass strings, now I want from here onwards, what I really want is the ideal curve of the truss rod to gently smooth out the imperfect curve of the fretboard, so that that extra little bit of room means we suddenly reduce that all over buzz, which is I call fret slap. And I call it fret slap to distinguish it from fret buzz, because the two of them have different causes, or different, they're caused by different things. So I'm doing leveling now on the D, really not because there's any choking notes, or not that we bend the D into such a place that it chokes. I'm doing it because I want to gently create more room for the strings to spin. Then I recalibrate for the A and so on. And once I've done this, then what I'll do is I will, off camera, I will mask off the whole of the neck with masking tape. I've got to get some more tomorrow, so I may just about run out tonight. Mask it all off, and then I'll sand and polish out the frets using a whole range of grades of paper and micro mesh. And once I've done that, before I do that, I'll re-crown the frets. I'll show you that in a minute. And then I'll polish them all out into playing condition again. And after that, it'll be a matter of cleaning up the guitar, checking everything through, and then putting new strings on, which will be only ball 10s, since there are 10s currently on here. So just a little play. A little bit of fret slap. It's kind of a zizzing sort of thing. So I'll just give it a little bit more in the A track. I mean, at the moment it is set pretty low an action, so we have got a small amount of room to ease off the challenge. But I always like to go over the top in the challenge to begin with, because why not? Puts us under. It's nice to have a challenge to work to. Okay, I'm going to now just do the low E calibration. The amount of adjustment is so tiny that it becomes sort of second nature how much or how little to do. It's not something you can really describe to anybody first time off. So if you take up this method, and I think there's a lot of very strong reasons why you do, not least because this is the only method when you level frets with the longitudinal compression imposed by the string loading at play. It's only in this method you're leveling with that at play. In the other methods, you level and then you reintroduce that compression when you put the strings on, and that compression pushes the wood around and squishes it and makes it stand up and crumple and whatever, microscopically, but no, that is so low. Gone sharp or soft or flat or whatever. That's not the point. Okay, that's good. That's done. Right, and that is at the low action. We could even afford to go up a bit, but right now I'm happy with that. So I'm going to bend, untidy and undo the strings from the outside inwards to keep the insert in its place. One of the things I'll also talk about, John, as I do on many videos, you may have seen me, so please forgive me if I'm repeating myself, is when you come to string your guitar using locking nuts, I strongly advise you don't just pull it right through to its full stretch and then lock it off. If you do that, you don't give yourself any second chance at slacking the strings if you need to readjust something and retighten them. If you do it to the full sort of stretch first time, you're going to you'll basically break the string the first time you have to adjust it, so you don't get a second bite at slackening and retightening. And there can be, certainly with a tunematic bridge, there can be quite a few reasons why you want to do that, i.e. not being able to intonate the guitar is one of them without adjusting stuff on the bridge. If you've pulled through and tightened, crimped off with the tuner thing, then you'll have crimped the string so badly that it won't tolerate slacking and redoing, which is such a pity because it'll cost you a new set of strings. So I discovered that the hard way over time. So what I do nowadays is I make sure that I put an extra little bit of string onto it. Now some people will say, well, what's the point if you've paid for locking tuners? Isn't that the whole point? You're supposed to be able to just push them through. Well, yes, it is. You can do that if you want, but you know, that under the understanding that you will not get a second chance at slacking them off. I think it's much more effective to I pull back one thumbnail's worth and allow that little bit to wrap around, and I crimp less harshly. The weakness of these is the crimping locking mechanism. I say this all the time, but to restrain a string purely by brute force of pushing a piece of metal against it is a crap system, and it's guaranteed to damage the string and weaken it. And the first opportunity that piece of string gets, it will break. Quite understandably, I would if I was the piece of string. So I don't recommend that. So I recommend less crimping force. But the problem you've got is there's no way you would know what the crimping force is. If you do it too little, what happens is it comes out and you have a problem. If you do it too much, you break the string almost immediately. So it's a really difficult, very unscientific system which depends on brute force, which I find any engineering system that depends on brute force bothers me. So I would prefer that we reduce the Bruce Forsythness, reduce the brute force, and add a little bit of wind on. Now, is it so much wind on that it traps an unreasonable amount of slack, causing you tuning problems? No, not in my experience, so it's nothing to worry about. So I say take on that extra little bit of string, reduce the clamping force, and the two things will happen. One is, if you need to take the strings off one more time to do something with the bridge, you can do it, and then the next time wind it all the way through and clamp it off, right? That may not be the way I'd like to do it ideally, but at least you've got a clean piece of string to do that clamping, and you've got away without having to spend on a second packet of strings, which in this day and age isn't cheap, as you darn well know. So, all good reasons. So what I'm doing here is I'm rounding off any flattened square edges put on by the process of fret leveling, and some of them have been required a bit more taking off than others, so they take a bit longer to round off. And the purpose of the marker pen the second time round is to allow me to round off the frets, but as long as I leave a thin line of black marker running down the center of the fret, it tells me I haven't touched that part of the fret. And if I haven't touched that part of the fret, then what follows is that I haven't lowered it relative to the others. So it means that I haven't undone the good work of fret leveling. Now these two frets here take a bit of rounding off, because relative to the low 12 and 13, these 14 and 15 were relatively high, quite a lot higher, relatively speaking. So certainly 14 required a fair bit of work to round it off. And we're just about, again, at the age of these frets where I wouldn't really want to do this more again on these frets. It would take it, but you're starting to get down into, you know, slightly too low territory. Now, you shouldn't have to do it again. That's what's good about this. There's a bit on this end. Yeah, it's a very accurate system, and the only downside about it is that it allows you to set very low actions, and the downside of that is that because we're working with such unusually low playing actions, which customers very often really like, the downside can be that because of that, any movement in the neck as a result of, for example, climate differences between two places, any change can cause the neck to flatten out a little bit or bow the other way or whatever, and in which case, if that happens, the tiny clearances that we've just made with this precision leveling and very low action can disappear, and you can get fret buzz, or sorry, I should say fret slap, back in quickly. And so for that reason, and you know, even if you don't have a hugely low action, it's the reason, those changes in the neck are the reason why everybody should be comfortable adjusting their guitar if necessary throughout the year. And a lot of people aren't, because a lot of people are brought up through the stupid forums and different media which kind of lead you, and I blame luthiers you know, for this a lot of the time, have played a role in mystifying all of this, so that people have genuinely come to a belief that they can damage their guitars by adjusting the truss rod. This is absolute nonsense. Also, the misinformation about what the truss rod is for. You can go to, you know, forums and you will see people claiming, so-called experts, claiming that the truss rod's purpose is to adjust your playing action. You know, so people will say, oh, my action is horrible, this, that and the other, or I'm buzzing, you know, and people will tell them to adjust their truss rod, and you know, in order to adjust their playing action. What is true is that the truss rod, adjustment of the truss rod, because it changes the neck shape, will have a consequence on the playing action, predominantly in the center of the neck, because that's where a more curved or flatter neck will impact on the action. You'll feel the differences there, but you don't adjust the truss rod. It's not there to change your action. It's not the means by which you change your playing action. The fact that it does change the playing action in that part of the guitar is a byproduct of what it's for, and its purpose is only to counter the curvature of the neck, or to control the curvature of the neck, and to be able to have it at a level of curvature that suits you and your style of playing. And within that, there are only a couple of things to say, and that is a couple of universal things to say. One is that it's a very subjective thing how much curvature you like, i.e. how high the action feels in the middle because you've dialed in more curvature. And why would you have more curvature? You'd have more curvature if you hit the strings really hard and they need more room to spin, all right? That's one reason why you would have more relief or curvature in your neck. As a result, as I've said, as a secondary effect of that, you would then find that your action is increased in the center of your neck, at the center of the neck's length, all right? But that's a secondary effect of making it more curved. If you just wanted a higher action, you would go to the nut end with your adjustable nut, or you would go to the bridge end and adjust your saddles higher or lower. That's where you adjust your playing action, or your height of your playing action. And ideally, you would probably want to have as flat a neck as possible, whilst leaving yourself enough room, enough playing or enough action for the strings to move. So you would, the absolutes about the neck shape, which you can't play the guitar if the neck is backbowed, i.e. humped. It's not playable. Certainly the first half of the neck isn't playable because the hump in the neck gets in the way and robs you of any clearances. So you either, the absolutes are, in your guitar, to be playable, the neck either has to be flat, in which case you either can't hit it very hard, or you must have a great fret leveling job done, or you must be prepared to have the playing action at the nut and the bridge a little higher if you're going dead flat. Or if you're very good with leveling and you don't hit very hard, you may just get away with flat neck plus a low action at both ends. However, if you like a flat neck but you're a hard hitter, then you're going to have to give the strings somewhere to move, and that's going to mean that if you insist on having a flat neck, then you probably have to have a higher action at one or both ends to allow the strings a room to move. Because one thing you can't cheat, you can't undo, is the fact that hard hit strings need more space to spin. If they don't have that space, they'll clatter against the frets in what I call fret slap, and it will be an unpleasant playing experience. So there's no way around it. There's no amount of leveling, fret leveling, that will buck that part of reality. Harder you hit the strings, the more room they need to move, and you have to give them that room to move, or else they'll hit the frets, and you will have fret slap. So there's nothing you can do about that. If you happen to be a light player, then you are more likely that you can have both a low action and a flat neck. But it's always a compromise between those three things: the height of your action at both ends, the flatness of your neck, and the, however, hardness of your striking the strings, i.e. how much they move to begin with. And you have to work it out between all of those three variables, or you have to balance out your preferences between those variables. But like I say, one of the things that technicians and guitar people have to realize is that you can't level your way out of being a hard hitter but wanting a really, really low action with a flat neck. There's no amount of fret leveling that will buy you the freedom to have both a low action and a very flat neck if you're a heavy hitter. And if you think there is, it'll just cost you your set of frets, because you'll level away until there's nothing left. So that's not a brilliant approach. So you've got to be conscious of the balance between those three things. There's a further constraint which doesn't often come into the thing, but it's always at play, and that is with bends. I can't use that one. With bending strings, there are geometric limits to how low you can have the action if the low or the tighter the neck radius is. So that because when you're bending a string, you're pushing it up a hill. If you look from end on, the frets are like that, and you're pushing from there up the hill. And as you push up the hill, you're taking away the clearance of that string, because it has to go back down the hill to a lower point, which is its start point. So the beginning and the start and the end of the E string is at a lower position on that curve than the top of the hill where you've bent it to. And so bending up a hill means that you quickly lose the clearance that the string needs to go back. And that means for a tight radius, like a vintage Fender Strat or something, if it's a 7.25 inch radius, you cannot have a very low playing action, a flat, fairly flat neck, and expect to get the bends to work without choking. If you want the bends on a vintage 7.25 inch Strat to work without choking, you have to compromise somewhere else, and that means you will have to compromise probably in the playing action set at the bridge. That's the usual place you compromise. So all of that means that it means that you're a good guitar tech will give you back your vintage 7.5-inch radius Strat, because you said to him, I need to be able to play my lead guitar and bend all those notes, and he'll give it to you back with a slightly higher action than you might think you want, because you might expect it to be as low as your Ibanez, or that might be what you're used to. But you won't get it, because if the guitar tech is doing what you say, which is your priority is to be able to bend notes for your lead guitar playing, then the good tech will know that the geometrical constraints of that tight radius means you can't have everything, and it's not a failure of the tech, and no amount of you asking the tech to continue leveling will do you any good, because like I said, you can't buck the system, you can't buck that physics of those constraints. So it's really useful to know that, and it's about being realistic about the interaction of the three parts of, I was going to say the three physical parts of the action, which is your first fret action, your last fret action, and your neck relief, but also the other key variable in that, and probably the grossest variable, which is the funny part, the bit that changes the most and over which both the tech, or which the tech has no control, and that is the how hard the player hits the strings. That's the biggest variable in the whole kind of equation. But suffice to say is when you're leveling, or when you're setting the action, you're working with those three primary parts, three physical parts of the guitar's setup: the first fret action, last fret action, and the amount of curvature in the neck. And it's going to be a balance between all of them. Okay, so I'm going to stop at this point with the camera work, because I'm going to sandpaper these out over a long and boring stretch of time, and I'll come back when this is also off camera. I'll clean this up and I'll give it a polish with some guitar polish. I'm not going to do much to this end here, because this would, trying to do it to this big flake that's been glued back in, all it would do is just collect cream and polishing cream, and it would look horrible. So I'm going to try and clean that up as much as possible, but without putting any cream on it. I'll polish this up as much as possible, and then we'll be ready to replace. I think at the moment the angle over the bridge is a little steeper than I would normally go. There isn't an absolute, so I'm just dialing those up a fraction, because I think that it could be a little bit less tight over the thing. It's not so bad anyway on roll-up bridges, because it's more forgiving on the strings. Okay, so mask the neck off. It's safe. The good thing about this nut, by the way, is you can take this insert out anytime you want now. I'll take it off just to keep it out of the way while I polish and sand the frets. See you in a minute. Okay, here we are. All the polishing out is done. All of the fret polishing, recrowning, fret polishing done. I've polished the whole guitar. I have tightened up the rhythm treble switch. What am I calling that for? Three-way selector switch. Now it's time to restring and set the intonation. I've also tightened up the jack socket, which was loose. So everything is in order, ready to go. Now remember, I'm going to put all the strings on first, and then I'm going to do the middle two first to keep the nut in place. Now, having done the setup and everything, it's likely that the bridge has moved on its adjusters. It's likely even that the nut may have moved slightly. So we've got to be prepared to put everything back into the playing action that I had it at. But the important part being is to do that, it will, because I've leveled the frets for that setting, for this action, it will go back into position perfectly. So I'm going to put the G in first, and I'm going to thread through. Now remember what I said at the beginning about giving yourself that little bit of room to move. So I'm going to hold it at the first fret. I'm going to pull back about a centimetre, actually that's my thing, and I'm going to do it up and that's that. Then I'm going to stay where you are, please. Stop the bar. Then I'm going to do this one up just to hold the nut in place. Okay, and this will go under the thing. So, you know, that's a tiny bit of string wound on, but it allows me to have that leeway to get out of jail. I'm going to now put on the whichever this one is, the D thing, and pull back again a centimetre, lock it off, but this time not as hard as I might normally do. So I'm kind of doing less damage to the string this way. I'm going to put on the bottom two, if I can line up the holes. So on the rollers, pull back a centimetre, lock it. And just keep the string low so it goes under. And then after this, just got the B and the high E to put on. All the way through. Pull back a centimetre, whoops, lock. Come on, that's a bit of a pain. There we go. Right, final two. Well, that's first of all, that's not on the roller, so let's get that right. So remember that earlier on I said that the secret to tuning stability is twofold, or two parts. The first one is the condition of your nut slots and the correct first fret action, which is all part of the same thing. Getting the nut right, that's 50% of tuning stability. The other part is stretching all of the slack out of your strings. And most people, I guess we always think we do that until we realise we don't. Now, this guitar, I don't know how many times John had stretched strings prior to playing on this one, if at all, but the point is, even when people do, the guitar, the strings will hold slack for ages until you wring it out by force. And if you don't wring it out, W-R-I-N-G, it'll stay at play in the guitar until it decides to come out, usually when you're least expecting it or when you least want it, in the middle of playing something. So if you do the hard stretching work first, and by that I mean beyond where you normally would think of stretching, further, more stretching than you would normally think, then you will get a far better result. So the first thing I'm going to do is just stretch the strings to bed them in. I don't know how well you can see anything, but it's getting late and I need to finish. So I'm just pulling the strings up, get them seated onto the posts. There is a bit wound around the post obviously, but not a massive amount, but I want it tightened up. Okay, make sure everything's on the rollers. Then I'm going to tighten up to pitch. Okay, that's up to pitch for the first time. What I also do at this point now is just readjust I'm slightly off out of view, but I'm going to readjust, check and adjust the last fret action since I know that the settings have probably moved a little bit. That's okay actually, and that's a bit high on the high E side, so I'm going to screw that in a little bit more. Go back down to 1.2, which is right on. Yeah, I'm okay with that. It's on. Okay. Right, so the first thing that's important to do now, and this, I'll probably see if we can see this in the, that's a good view. Right, so now we're at pitch. What I'm now going to do is get the strings and start at one end and push and pull between thumb and forefinger. You can buy a plastic device called a string stretcher, but when I found, and it saves the pain on your thumbs, but I actually found that it broke more strings doing it that way, because you can't feel what you're doing, and you put on, at times you'll end up putting on a little bit more pressure than is good for it, and it's a quicker way to broken strings. You'll still get the occasional E string breaking here doing this, usually on 9 sets rather than 10s, but you have to be careful, and it's just it's what, you know, it's par for the course. And we do it again. Stretch, push, stretch, push, stretch. And basically we want to do that until we don't get any more detuning as we go along. That's the challenge. Stretch this out. And once we've got rid of all the slack, then you'll know it will stay in tune. And that, coupled with the friction-free slots in the nut and the correct height of the first fret, together those things will give you tuning stability, and when you have it, it'll just be miraculous. Nearly there. And I tend to do some bends. See, nearly in tune. Fabulous. Last bit of the game before going home is time to check the intonation and adjust if necessary. So here we have a little Korg tuner, which is very effective at registering when something's in tune, something isn't. Now, if I'll sort of probably be in between, whoops, different cameras here. Don't know what you can see. Let's zoom in on the zoom in. Let's zoom in, shall we? Oh yeah, zoom in on the tuner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the E. So I tune it by pinging the 12th fret harmonic and tuning the guitar until the 12th fret harmonic ping is on E. And then if the playing length for this string is exactly correct, the fretted note should be the same as the pinged note. So here's the pinged note, there's the fretted note. Pretty much the same. very close. Now that one's a bit flat. Oh, and the reason that's flat is if you come down here and look at the close-up world, the where are we? The A is quite a step further back. The G is the D is just about right. A is too far back. In fact, it's right back with the E. So that's what's the tune has picked up pretty well, which I'm very pleased at. Let's go back to one size. So what we do at this point now is when we have one that is like that, we need now to bring the A saddle forward. It's flat because it's too long a playing length. So we gently tweak it forward with our screwdriver, and that's about halfway there. That's good. And you might not be able to see this right now. Yep. Yep. Beautiful. Done. Time to go home. Thank you for watching. See you for another episode very, very soon. I'm happy with this. This is a very nice Epiphone Les Paul, and all that's going back with it is the old nut, which I will stick to somewhere with a bit of something. That's basically what I'll do. I'll do this. You're going home, nut. There we are. Home you go. How about that? Ready to go. Thanks a lot for watching. See you soon.